I have been painting in watercolor for years, and over that time I have used and experimented with tons of different supplies and tools. Through simple trial and error, I have discovered the paper, paints, brushes, and palettes that work best for me. However, this trial and error process has, at times, been a little bit expensive. There were times I purchased things along the way that I realized only later I didn't really need. This YouTube channel exists in part because I wanted to share my discoveries and my experience with watercolor materials and help other people navigate all those choices out there. Simply put, this is where I share the information I wish I had been given when I was just getting started. In today's video, I have the beginning watercolor artist in mind. I want to give you a list of my recommendations for watercolor paper, paints, brushes, and palettes. If this sounds like the kind of information that you need, keep on watching. Hi, welcome to my studio. My name is Kris. This channel is all about tools, tips, and tutorials for growing in watercolor. In addition to this YouTube channel, I also have an online studio, a website, that has a growing collection of free and premium resources for the growing watercolor artist. One of my free courses on that website is called Getting Started in Watercolor. It provides an overview of the supplies and materials that are needed for setting up a watercolor practice. The course provides a deep dive into the things that I'm going to talk about today in this video. So if you really want to learn even more about the subject, I encourage you to check out my free course. You can find it at studio.krisdebruine.com. Okay, let's get back to today's topic. This video is for the beginning artist. The beginning artist who is serious about getting started right in watercolor, is willing to make a bit of an investment, and yet I'm also going to be price conscious in my recommendations. In other words, I've narrowed down my recommendations for the watercolor supplies that are essential. I haven't included any frills or extras. These are just the minimum that you need to get started. I'm also focusing on really good quality supplies that are artist grade, not student grade. That's because I have found that low quality supplies are frustrating to use and can hold you back in your progress. At the same time, I am recommending supplies that are affordable. Now, affordability is, of course, relative. What is affordable for one person is not necessarily affordable for another. I get that. Just know that with these recommendations, I'm looking for the lowest price options within a certain standard of quality. My recommendations are all given within the context of where I live in the United States. I realize that some of these items might not be available where you live. In that case, I encourage you to talk to other artists or go to art stores near you to find out what are comparable materials. I am not sponsored by any of these manufacturers. These are my honest recommendations that are based on years of experience, and these are the exact same recommendations that I am currently giving to my students who take my classes. Okay, let's get started. First of all, let's talk about paper. In my opinion, the most important ingredient in watercolor is the paper. If there is a material that I think you should splurge on a little bit, it's the paper. I recommend my students always use 100% cotton paper that is designed for watercolor. Always look for the designation on the packaging that says 100% cotton. If it doesn't say that, it's probably not 100% cotton. The fibers that make up the paper make a huge difference in the way the pigments and the water interact on the surface. 100% cotton papers tend to dry a little bit slower, and they allow for greater absorption of the water and the pigments. This allows you to get that beautiful blending of colors that watercolor is known for. Currently, my favorite and recommended watercolor paper brand is Bahong from China. This paper is generally more affordable than other 100% cotton brands, and it's readily available in many regions around the world. I buy the paper in one of two ways. Either as full-size sheets, which are 30 inches by 22 inches, that's approximately 76 by 55 centimeters. I then rip the paper to the size I need for my paintings. I also purchase this paper in a block. I like either the 9 by 12 or the 11 by 15 inch size. However, for the beginner, I would recommend the 9 by 12 size. It is usually best to start smaller with your paintings when you're just getting started. Now, one thing to know about Ba Hong, they have both an artist and an academy grade. The academy grade is their student grade paper. However, unlike with other brands, the Ba Hong academy grade is really great paper. It's a little less expensive than the artist grade, and it's still a great option. I'm not going to list any prices in this video because the prices just change so quickly. However, I will provide links to all of my recommended products in the video description below. And if you use my links to purchase your supplies, I receive a very small commission from the sale, but you don't pay a penny more. That's just a simple way to support the creation of this free content, and I thank you in advance. Now let's talk about paints. My preferred brand of watercolor paint is Daniel Smith. However, there are many excellent brands of paint, and I encourage people to find a brand that they like. Just make sure that you're purchasing artist grade paint and not student grade. Here, with paints, artist versus student grade makes a big difference. Some brands have a lower quality collection of paints that are designed for students. They're called student grade, and these are less expensive, but in the end, you have to use more paint to get the same amount of pigment load in your washes. So I don't think it's really worth purchasing student grade paint. When you're shopping, just be aware that there is student versus artist grade. Some brands, however, like Daniel Smith, they don't even sell student grade paint. I also recommend that my students purchase their paints in tubes and not as dried cakes of paint. You will have an easier time mixing thick applications of paint when using paint out of a tube. More important than the brand of paint is the number and specific colors of paint that you buy when you're first getting started. Paint tubes can be pretty expensive, so it can be more cost-effective to buy a set of colors from a manufacturer. I recommend that my students buy a limited palette of maybe 9 to 12 colors to get started. Your set of colors should include a cool and a warm yellow, a cool and a warm red, and a cool and a warm blue, and a few earth tone colors. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about with color temperatures like that, I'll direct you to some of my other videos on this channel that explain that concept a little bit better. I'm going to provide a link to a couple sets of professional quality paint sets in the video description below, along with a list of specific colors. As you grow in watercolor practice, you will add or subtract from these colors as you develop your own style. But this is just a good place to get started. Also, as an added bonus, if you want to know all the colors I currently have on my watercolor palette here in my studio, check out my free color chart. I'll provide a link in the description below. Now let's talk about watercolor brushes. When we start talking about brushes, the number of options and the types of brushes can be overwhelming. There are round brushes and flat brushes, fan and rigger brushes, cat's tongue and filberts. But I'm going to make this simple. I'm going to suggest that you start with just 4 brushes, all of them round brushes. You will need one large, soft brush that holds lots of water, a couple medium-sized brushes that are a little bit stiffer, and a small liner brush for small details. That's it. I prefer the Princeton brand of brushes because they're durable, cost-effective, and readily available where I live. The exact brand is not as important as the type and size of brush. I will leave links to my 4 recommended brushes in the video description below. These are really all you need to get started in watercolor. Now, palettes. I've used all kinds of different palettes in my many years of painting in watercolor. If you've watched my channel for long, you know I like to use a heavy porcelain palette for use in my studio. However, that is not the palette I recommend for beginners. Rather, I suggest using a portable plastic or metal palette like this one here when getting started. This is a Mijello airtight 18 well travel palette. It's very affordable, has several large mixing areas, and deep wells for your paints. I have several videos on my channel that give an in-depth review of this palette. I'll link to those videos below. The main thing to keep in mind with a palette is that the mixing surface needs to be white. That allows you to accurately mix your colors. I also like a mixing area that allows me to create several large, big, juicy washes of paint. This palette meets all of those requirements. So there you go. all of my recommendations for the essential supplies that you need to get started in watercolor. I encourage you to start simple and begin with just these basics, and then add to your collection as you gain more experience. Each artist eventually develops their own preferences and their own collections of tools that reflect their own way of working, their own creativity. I encourage you to take my recommendations as just that. They're my recommendations, my preferences, and then add to them and experiment as you go. If you have other recommendations or your own suggestions, please add them to the comments below. I am always eager to hear what other artists are using. Thanks for watching and for commenting. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel so you can stay informed and know when my next video is released. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and keep on growing in watercolor.